Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Harriet, a public programme curator here at the Building Centre, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the first talk in our new series, Woodwork, where each week we have invited designers to talk to us about their projects in timber. The series accompanies our exhibition, Conversations about Climate Change, in partnership with the Timber Trade Federation. The exhibition is the result of a design competition, and the 6 winners have created conversation climate pieces made of flagged licensed hardwoods. The show is actually being installed as I speak downstairs, and you'll be able to visit it on our website very soon. I'd like to say a big thank you to Wood for Good, who are kindly supporting the Woodwork series. And just to let you know that this event is being filmed and it will be available to watch on our website and YouTube channel if you want to revisit it. So I'm delighted to introduce our speaker today, Ingrid Petit, Associate at Feilden Fowles. Ingrid joined Feilden Fowles in 2011 and has since worked on a wide range of projects from residential to educational. She was project architect on recently completed schemes, including a new teaching and learning centre for Pinewood School and the Factory project in Carlisle. She also recently led the winning bid in the National Railway Museum's Central Hall Design competition. Today, she will talk to us about Waterloo City Farm, a community farm located on a previously unused strip of land south of Waterloo Station. There'll be time at the end for Ingrid to answer some of your questions, so please send them into the Q&A chat at the bottom of your screen. All right, over to you, Ingrid.
Great, perfect. Thank you very much, Harriet. I will share my screen. Can you see that? All right, now I'm in full screen.
It looks good.
Perfect. All right, thank you very much for the introduction. And hi, everyone. Thank you very much for registering for this talk. For the ones who don't know us, Feilden Fowles was established by Edmund Fowles and Fergus Feilden in 2010. We're now a team of 20 people. And today, for this first wood talk, I will focus on our studio, which is based on the Waterloo City Farm in Waterloo. I was closely involved with the studio design and delivery, and a bit less with the barn and animal pens, but I will touch on those as well. So starting with the site is an unused strip of land, which is just next to Waterloo and across from Westminster. The site belongs to Guy's and St. Thomas's Hospital, which is across the road. The hospital's got planned to develop the full area. So they're in the process of buying all the plots of land around our kind of farm. And they've got a big master plan kind of coming up for the area. But in the meantime, given that the site was unused and it's kind of like 5 years at the time or 8 years now until the site will be developed. And given that Lambeth and Southwark are some of the most deprived boroughs in the UK, the hospital decided to donate the site in the meantime to 2 charities who are focused on improving education, particularly for those at risk of exclusions. These 2 charities are Jamie's Farm, who are based in the West Country, and Oasis Academy, with a local school. These 2 charities wanted to use the site as an opportunity to have a retreat from the city, to bring schools to learn by doing, to learn outdoor. So that's how we found the site, not quite as we found it, because it actually was overgrown and full of rubbish. So that's just as we found it after clearing it. In terms of the history of the site, it is quite unusual to find an empty site in Westminster, just near Waterloo. The site used to actually have a row of Victorian houses with back garden looking onto the brick boundary wall, which is still existing. These houses were demolished during the war. There were then some prefabricated buildings on the site, which were then demolished in the 90s, I think. In terms of the brief from the farm, I've said it's like a retreat from the city. It's a place where we can grow our own food. So there's like planters, polytunnels. It's also a place where people can learn about farming. So there's a place for animals as well on the site. So when we started the master plan, we had to think about how all those functions, growing, planting, animal, would go onto the site, with also a function of revenue making, with a large space for the farm that can be rented out for weddings, etc. One of the functions which was always kind of let at the end of the conversation was the conversations about office space for the volunteers on site. Obviously, being two charities, budget was really low for the project. They had to fundraise quite a lot. So building an office was always kind of at the bottom of the list. Given those budget constraints, we also had to think about phasing the site, so phasing the project. So the first phase could kind of help raising money for the second phase. With all of these conversations, we actually found a compromise with the two charities, that we would take a portion of the site towards the end of the site, the less public area of the site, and build a studio there. In exchange of that, we would do the work on the master plan and all the associated buildings pro. And we will also give space into the studio for their volunteers, and an opportunity as well to use our meeting spaces. So as I mentioned, the project was phased. The first phase was actually the kind of central band, which are the animal pens, all the growing planters and the polytunnel. The second phase is the studio and the world garden. And the third phase is the most public phase, which is the big barn for events, for school groups, and which gives a new public entrance to the farm. On all of these projects, we had a lot of exploration about how kind of timber be jointed together, how to kind of connect a beam and a column. Starting with the animal pens, which was a really quick project, a really kind of simple design, low cost, where timbers are just bolted together, cross brace are made of timber. That was built really quickly at the start, and then cladded with large timber. And you can here see the first residents and the first pigs to enjoy the animal pens. Following this, we moved on to the studio project, the phase 2 of the master plan. So starting with the placement of the building, in the first master plan, we actually drew the proposed studio along the existing gable. That was to try to maximize the site. But looking at the historical plan, we realized that there was actually an opportunity to move the building 90 degrees along the street to recreate a sheltered garden to the south. In terms of the plan itself, it was interesting as an architect to be our own client, and also as a quite young practice, who was maybe 10 to 12 people at the time, to think about, we've got this opportunity to design our own space. We probably will be there for 5 to 8 years. How is the practice going to grow with this space? So the plan is quite simple. On one end, we've got all the services, drainage, water, electricity coming in, with 2 toilets, including 1 accessible toilet. We've got some storage with all the server spaces, and then a kitchen. There's the large open space, which can seat up to 25 people. There used to actually be an informal kind of lunch table here. It has now been replaced by a full bay, full row of desks. And then at the end of the building, there's a meeting room, which is shared with the farm. The section was a bit more difficult to kind of get to the final design. As we were building against the street, we wanted the studio to be discreet on the street, so people couldn't kind of peek through a window and distract us when we were trying to work. So we kind of had this ambition for this elevation to be quite blank. There were then discussions with the structural engineers on the project, structure workshop, and the timber framers on the project, timber workshop, about the available length of timber we're using Douglas fir for this project, and the available lengths are up to 8 meters. So that's kind of started dictated the section. Again, trying to keep the construction as lean, as cost effective as possible. So using kind of the maximal lengths available. Saying that, we were worried about how the plan became deeper, and therefore we were worried about natural light in the back of the plan. And looking at the array studio, we were inspired by the kind of pitched north window, which brings north light, diffuse light into the studios. This informed the final elevation, or the final section, sorry, for the studio, where we introduced similar pitched north lights onto the street. This was obviously a big investment for the practice to kind of build your own studio. And given the temporary nature of the site, we wanted to make sure that it could be dismantled and rebuilt somewhere else once we had to vacate the site. Therefore, a lot of thought had been given about how to assemble the timbers together. This was done in collaboration with Structure Workshop and Timber Workshop. And there was a lot of thought about cost as well. So, for example, the double beams, which usually have a steel flitch plate sandwiched in between the two timbers. This flitch plate was only located, the steel flitch plate is only located at connections. The rest is only a plywood sheet to try to keep cost to a minimum. We then look at how a column meet a beam and how we could dismantle that easily without damaging the timber once we've got to move. For that, we're using a simple metal dowel, which is kind of fit into pre-drilled holes into the timber and flitch plate, and can be tapped in fully once we move, can be tapped out without damaging the structure. I have to say, I really hope I will be on holidays when we have to move out from the site. There was also interesting discussions about how to make the grid as efficient as possible for the studio. We looked at the size of a plywood sheet. The full roof had to have plywood sheathing, 18 mil plywood sheet. So we looked at how to reduce cuts and how to reduce waste for the plywood. And we worked with the size of a sheet to inform the regularity of the structure. This kind of introduced an interesting rhythm in the noggins, which are there to support the plywood sheathing above. In terms of the cladding, we're using Ondine, which is an agricultural corrugated material. It's really cheap, £16 a sheet. And we thought, because it's temporary and easy to replace, that was kind of the right thing to use. So this material is used for the roof, but also for the street elevation, which, as we said, we wanted to keep solid as much as possible to avoid distraction. So the elevation is solid up to 2.5 meters, which matches the datum of the boundary wall, the brick boundary wall on the other side. We then have a continuous row of window fixed glazing, which brings that north light I referred to before. There's an interesting detail as well that is introduced with the kind of cranking or the angle of the window. And that is that it allows us to have this piece of plywood, which is actually a flap that we can open up. And when we open the doors as well, this allows us to introduce cross ventilation within the space. So the studio space is fully naturally ventilated. The south elevation is different from the street elevation. This is fully glazed, opens towards the walled garden. Being an elevation facing south, we had obviously to think about overheating and trying to reduce summer kind of light getting into the space. So the internal beams are extended to provide a cantilever, breaking the summer light and avoiding overheating in the space. We quite like this kind of idea of the walled garden and secluded space at the end of the farm. So that was quite important to have as much as much glazing as possible, overlooking onto the walled garden. You might have noticed in the visual that the columns along these elevations are not timber, they're made of steel. This steel was laser cut and then welded together. The reason why it was made of steel is first, it provides us with a flitch plate to support the beam above. It also provides us with a way to fix the cross bracing along this elevation. Being a fully glazed elevation, we required to integrate 4 cross brace to stabilize the elevation. And also using steel windows. So the back of the T columns provide us a way to fix the steel windows onto the column, obviously using a thermal break in between the structure and the window. I mentioned timber workshop earlier. On the right here, this is Alex Thomas. Alex used to work for Feilden Fowles a few years ago, and he decided to move to Devon to work for Carpenter's Hawk. We were lucky that at the time where we looked at the studio, Alex was about to set up his own practice timber workshop. So that was his first project. The frame was done in Devon and even assembled there. So everything was done in Devon before being brought to London. In the meantime, we had cast the slab in London, so it was ready for them to start. I think they arrived on a Friday, brought all the timbers with them, and then we started by putting all the base plates to support the first column. Again, just tapping those dowels in, and then the first column was erected with the first beam. And within a weekend, we had the full frame up, which was incredible to see, really. Just in a weekend to just start seeing the full shell of the building. This then allowed us to bring the next contractor on site, which we did all the insulation, cladding of the building and fit out. So you can see here a picture of the space before we brought all the mess in. So there's kind of interesting details as well in relation to the landscape. So that's how we found the site, kind of how we sing. That was done by Dan Pearson's studio. Again, you might have noticed in the photos I've just shown, there's minimum detail at the edge of the roof. There's no gutters. It's with this idea of leanness to try to keep all components to a minimum. We let the water run off the roof, be collected into this reel, and then recycled to be used to water the planting. Just a note as well, those hard pavers are actually lintels from Travis Perkin. So a lot of this project was just trying to find like good cost-effective solutions. And that's the space in use. I will just move on to the barn quickly to finish. The barn, again, was done in collaboration with Structure Workshop and Timber Workshop. And there were extensive discussions, especially with Structure Workshop, about the available size of softwood timber, similar to what we had in the studio. We wanted to avoid the use of engineered timbers, but there was this ambition to do a large kind of gathering space. So the compromise was to do a large kind of nave almost with 2 aisles to each side. This stepping of the structure provided us an opportunity at high level to have also ventilation to guarantee that the space could be naturally ventilated. There was also, again, a lot of discussions about joints. How do timber members meet together? And again, budget was quite low, so kind of refinement in the joints was difficult to allow in the cost plan. So there, the solution was to have this laser cut plywood kind of jig that were placed onto the joint, leaving kind of a rough joint between the timber members behind it. the barn has been a great addition for the master plan because it has allowed the farm to bring more and more people onto the site, hold exhibitions, kind of concerts, weddings, and try to kind of raise money for the activities that they do with the schools there. I will just finish back on the studio and the impact of the studio on our culture, especially during these pandemic times. It's kind of made us realize how lucky we are to have this garden space where we can have lunch together, where we can have parties, but where we also have a space to do physical modeling and prototyping. I can't believe it, but I am actually really missing the office. I didn't think I would ever say that, but I can't wait going back there. And then to expand the discussion, I guess it was interesting starting from a pig pen to then a studio and then a barn, all the lessons we've learned about timber and how these were then translated to our recently completed project of a gallery and visitor center for Yorkshire Sculpture Park. These lessons have been also informing a dining hall, which is currently on site for Homerton College in Cambridge. And we now have the challenge to see how these lessons can be translated and scaled up, this ambition about leanness as well, how this can be scaled up to a 16.5 million project for the National Railway Museum in York. Thank you very much. That's my last slide. I think I'm almost on time. That's 20 minutes on the nose.
Thank you, Ingrid. That was so brilliant to hear more about the project. And as you were saying, it feels really significant at the moment. Now we all know how important outdoor space is in these times. In fact, I was going to ask, has it been open to the community during the pandemic?
Yeah, so the school is still running for children from key workers, so they're still allowed on site. When schools were open, the farm was also still running some events. So yeah, we're trying to still make the most of it, and despite the situation.
Yeah. Right, I think we have time for a few questions that we have in our Q&A. So I will start with Ingrid. This looks great. What was the timber species you used for the frame? And did you apply any treatment to the wood that is exposed externally?
Yes. So there's different, it's all Douglas fir. It's just on the pens and the barns, it's rough sawn, whereas it's planed on our office. In terms of external treatment, if I remember correctly, it was Osmo that was applied to the timber.
Great. Another one here. Hi, Ingrid. This is a wonderful project. I'm afraid I missed the first few minutes, so didn't hear how temporary it is. Would you mind repeating how many years you plan to be at this location? Thanks, Lucy.
Yeah. We were hoping, well, it was given for 5 years. The pandemic being on our side, we might have until next September, which would bring us, I think to 6 years. So we'll see how the pandemic plays at our advantage.
Do you have a new location in mind?
No, we're currently actively looking for it. So yeah, there's potential opportunities in the southwest. Fergus is actually working from the southwest, so we're thinking about potentially using it as a satellite. We've also looked at other ways of using it, not necessarily for us, but perhaps gifting it to a school because it's a quite nice size for a classroom. Also, it could be a nice dwelling. So there's a lot of ideas bubbling in the kind of background, and we're going to look at that for the next year.
Amazing. Okay, another one here. Do the timber beams run continuously through the studio space to cantilever overhang outside? Is thermal bridging an issue, and how did you deal with it?
They do run continuously. It is not the greatest detail in terms of cold bridging. I mean, there's two schools of thoughts. Being timber, the cold bridging is less kind of bad than if it was steel. And being a temporary space, I guess we kind of said, well, it's acceptable. But yeah, I have to agree, it's not the best detail to have the structure kind of spanning from inside to outside.
And another one, where did you get inspiration for the building, and was there any vernacular inspiration?
Yeah, a lot about agricultural buildings, really, and then kind of buildings against walls, kind of glass houses. Obviously, we don't have the wall, but for the animal pens, there was this nice relationship with the brick wall. So yeah, agricultural glass houses, and just we've got great engineers, to be honest. Peter Laidler from Structure Workshop, like we always have really great discussions about kind of how architecture and structure could come together. So once we use precedent, there's also kind of just collaborative discussions with our consultants to push the design.
Great. I'm afraid I think that's all we have time for today, although we have got lots of other questions, but I'm afraid I don't think we'll have time to address them. But if you want to email them to me, I can pass them on to Ingrid and we can get back to you. My email address is hjennings@buildingcentre.co.uk. So I just want to say a massive thank you again, Ingrid, for spending the time to talk to us today about a brilliant project. Say thank you to all of the audience for joining us, and let you know that we have another Woodwork talk next week, which will be with Kirsten Haggart from War Thistleton. So I hope you can join us then. Thank you all.
Great, thank you very much. See you.